Hey guys, thanks for joining. It looks like we've got enough people on the line here to go ahead and get started. So you're speaking with two representatives of AppNexus. I'm Kevin Sinha. I'm on the sales engineering team, and with me I've got Nick Robnett from the implementation consulting team. We wanted to welcome you to our webinar on demystifying performance optimization. So as you know, if you've worked with or spoken with anybody from AppNexus, we at AppNexus feel that it's very important and critical, in fact, for anybody looking to take their online advertising business to the next level to have at least a good framework of understanding around how online performance optimization works. And our goal in this presentation is, especially for somebody who may not have too much familiarity with how performance optimization works, to be able to connect some of the dots around how we think about optimization and what we think it's important for you to know about optimization. So as I mentioned, you've got two folks on the line here. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so please use the chat line. Our goal will be to go ahead and address those as they come up. Hopefully, most of those will be applicable to everybody on the line. Just to speak to our agenda here a little bit, we'll start by speaking briefly about the evolution of the need for performance-based optimization in online advertising. We'll then connect you guys to what we feel is a relatable example to start thinking about how optimization works. We'll then start discussing how AppNexus's optimization works in action. So we'll connect you to a real example of one of our partners. And we'll also be discussing a couple of case studies around enhancements that we've made to our optimization engine. So we think that a lot of this is going to be useful to people who are considering how to take their business to the next level. We also encourage you, if you're a client of AppNexus, to reach out to your account manager and your implementation consultant to learn more after this webinar. So we want you to think of this webinar as a framework for building your knowledge around performance optimization. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So as we mentioned, our goal in the beginning here is to quickly overview the evolution of the need for performance optimization in an automated fashion. So if you think back to the history of online advertising, the earliest relationships between advertisers and publishers were typically handled on an extremely manual basis. And as those connections grew, you started having more partners like networks and SSPs and DSPs playing roles as intermediaries, helping manage the complexity and complexity of relationships within the ecosystem. So ultimately, you get to a familiar scenario for anybody who's been in online advertising for the past couple of years, which is that you end up having one campaign with one goal that may need to understand what inventory works across literally millions of sites. So when you're managing several of those campaigns and now you're interacting with inventory coming in from exchanges, additional networks, especially as RTV has evolved to connect all of the key platforms in the space, it becomes incredibly important to not just be able to have a good sense and experience around what works for those campaigns, but also to be able to layer in some sort of automated technology to enable you to scale effectively. So if you have one campaign manager focused on a single campaign, purely because it's so complicated to be able to filter in and out inventory that is performing or isn't performing, that becomes a difficult challenge in terms of scaling any business. So our goal here at AppNexus is to give you guys a solid framework in how optimization works, how we think about and how we approach optimization, but also to make sure that you're using that learning combined with your personal experience in running campaigns. So we think of it very much as a partnership between technology and experience. And that's kind of the crux of what we're discussing here today. How do we approach the technological element of that? So a key piece of what we want you to think about as we go through the next few slides is, what does optimization mean to you? And that may be a very basic question, but we do want to outline how everybody on the line is thinking about this. So for a network or an intermediary who's looking to buy inventory on behalf of an advertiser or vice versa, if they're looking to maximize the revenue that a publisher is getting, we think it's critical, of course, to connect the right ad to the right person. So audience does play a role here, and you'll see more about that as we get to how we convert performance goals into relatable estimated costs per thousand impressions, so estimated CPMs. For the advertiser, of course, it's important to find the right user, given that almost every campaign is operating against some sort of performance goal as well as some sort of budget, even if those aren't always overtly described. So we know that it's critical to be able to maximize the valuable reach that you're getting within a budget that you might have for a particular campaign. And of course, for a publisher, performance optimization plays a key role because when you're connected to a variety of sources of demand, you want to make sure that the advertisers who are getting the advertisers with whom you're selling inventory to are getting the maximum value out of what you're presenting. So to be able to make sure that the goals that they have are converted correctly and that their likelihood of performing is maximized by the engine sitting in the middle of the advertiser and the publisher. So hopefully that gives everybody on the line a bit of a framework as to why we think these next few slides will be critical to how you understand and how you think about optimization. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, our first goal here is, especially for anybody who's very new to the concept of performance optimization, to describe kind of a relatable example. And it's one that we use here often at AppNexus, both with new clients, but also when we're training our new employees internally. And we refer to it as the restaurant example. So since we're headquartered out of New York City, as anybody on the line might know, New York City has an extremely robust and vibrant and sometimes overwhelming food scene and restaurant scene. And our example here is to present to you how might you go about finding what restaurant you as a consumer enjoy in an environment like New York City. So let's say, for example, there are at least hundreds, if not thousands, of restaurants in the city, and you, of course, as a single individual, have some controls over how you approach those. You have some insight, maybe from friends. You know that perhaps you like one type of food versus another. So there are certain things that allow you to approach how you face this challenge naturally. And those are what we consider from an optimization perspective, kind of how you might set a campaign up before actually setting it live. Moving beyond that, you see quickly that the challenge becomes that as you're picking through restaurants, you're naturally going to be hitting ones that you don't like. And the goal is to avoid spending too much money in restaurants that you weren't ever going to like based on what you've understood earlier on. So the way AppNexus thinks about optimization in this relevant example is that what we want you to do is to go ahead and know as quickly as possible, based on the information you learn in those first few visits to restaurants, which ones are going to be working better for you so that you evolve and iterate on how you select the next few restaurants. Meaning that as you start to understand that you like perhaps Thai food, that you narrow down the next few restaurants that you're trying out to Thai food so that the return you're getting on any visit, there's a likelihood of it being higher in terms of value to you as a consumer. So one question that somebody has sent through the chat line, which I think might be relevant to discuss here, is how does something like a guide tool like Yelp.com translate to the optimization scenario? So Yelp.com is a good additional element to this example, because what Yelp.com is essentially doing is providing you with an additional framework of experience. It's based on others who have visited restaurants, which we would potentially equate to your company having experience with running a particular type of campaign or interacting with particular types of inventory. So this is extremely relatable because, as I mentioned earlier, here we think that it's very critical for any new campaign that you're running to be executed based on a combination of using our automated technologies and our algorithms layered in with your expertise and your knowledge about what works, what doesn't, what types of audience might you want to reach, what types of audience might you want to avoid, what types of inventory you might want to reach, and what types of inventory you might want to avoid. So thank you for that question. Hopefully that relays how, for this restaurant example, Yelp would allow you to actually filter down from the very beginning the approach that you're taking to trying restaurants out of a massive pool of availability. So from there, I'd like to go ahead and hand the mic over to Nick, who's going to speak to optimization in action.
All right, thanks again for joining, everybody. My name is Nick, and I'm going to walk us through a slightly more specific example of how optimization works. To translate it from the last example, you can kind of start by thinking of these boxes as a corollary to the restaurants, as Kevin was just describing. And we're going to walk through a step-by-step of the learning and optimization process so you can see how it will shake out depending on how users are actually responding to your advertising. So when you begin, you don't have a lot of information on these restaurants, so you start to learn across all of this different available inventory that's on the internet. Now, as you can see, as shown by these basket icons, users are going to be responding to your ads in certain parts, but not others. And as the campaign continues to deliver, you're going to start to value this inventory with respect to where you're finding these users that are responding to your ads. So if you have found a location where your campaign is running successfully, that's automatically going to be valued higher, and you're going to bid more aggressively to pursue that inventory. Whereas you can see these other pieces of inventory where you haven't had a user response are still valued relatively lower and become less important to the success of your campaign's delivery and are treated accordingly. As this continues and the user response reaches a certain point, you can see that these pieces of inventory eventually become optimized. And you can see the few that have been shaded, where you show we've got 3 instances of user response in each of them. The value has grown to reflect that this is a piece of inventory where users are responding more aggressively. And so users are then this inventory is then being bid on appropriately. On the other hand, it's important to look at the inventory that you still have across all of these different pieces where we haven't seen any user response. The value has stayed relatively low, and the system is automatically continuing to treat them as such. Finally, you can see as the campaign has progressed for long enough and enough impressions have been delivered, you have some pieces of optimized inventory, and on the other hand, you have these pieces of inventory that never performed. The value of them never increased, and so appropriately, your campaign and your bidding strategy has automatically moved away from that inventory so that it could focus on these other pieces where you are actually seeing your performance. And as the campaign continues along even further, it's important to know that, like Kevin alluded to in the beginning of the presentation, the internet's a very large, organic, and constantly growing place. And so there's other pieces of inventory. We see this other part has also reached the optimized state once it reached enough user responses. And still, even as your campaign is buying, there's more inventory being constantly introduced. And now we've found another piece that the system is automatically going to start learning on, and it will go through the same process that you saw with these other parts of the inventory and possibly become another optimized piece of traffic where your campaign is delivering. And this is all done on this performance translation that brings everything down to a CPM. So you can see here, we look at the historical conversions over the historical impressions. We multiply that by the CPA goal, which is what the value of a conversion actually is. And then the last piece we introduced there is called the cadence modifier, which reflects the user behavior and impacts the value of what this impression is. And using this calculation, we come up with this eCPM. We do this because ad exchanges transact inventory on a CPM basis rather than a CPA basis, because a publisher wants to be paid on a CPM, and so using this type of method, we can have a buyer evaluate what a piece of inventory is going to be worth to them, and then use that information to inform what price they offer in a real-time auction environment when they submit their bid for this inventory. So this is what the optimization system tries to do. And as the previous example showed, we take these steps through optimization as you are seeing this user activity to build up our confidence. And then once we hit that optimized state, then we allow the bidding algorithm to automatically submit these bids when we're confident of that valuation. We're getting some questions in here, so I'm going to stop for a second about what the cadence modifier really is, what it does, and and how that impacts the bidding process. I mentioned this briefly, but the cadence modifier takes user recency and user frequency into account for every impression that you bid on with our optimization system. So to use a specific example, what this means is if, for instance, you have a user that has seen several impressions, including they've just seen an impression very, very recently, we find that there's a high likelihood that that user is probably not going to convert on that impression if they didn't convert on the last impression. And so automatically, the system is going to lower the value, in this case, of what that bid is going to be submitted, since, even though the inventory may be performing very, very well, it is unlikely that that user is going to convert, and that should be reflected in your bid. Now, to use a sample campaign, which will provide even more of a specific example, we're going to assume that we have this new campaign for advertiser X, and he's only targeting users in Italy. So here we say that there are 150 venues for this campaign to build on. And just to explain what that means, a venue is how we are organizing the inventory in our system so that specific campaigns and even specific creatives are able to optimize and evaluate what they should be bidding on this inventory. So throughout the process of delivery, we're going to find that 30 of these 150 venues are able to optimize. And what this means is that through the buying process, when we generate a sufficient user response for these specific venues, and we find that that inventory is performing well for your campaign, they reach that optimized state that we referred to a little bit ago. And then these are the campaigns that are going to be actively bidding what the valuation system says that these impressions are worth. And this is just done automatically, whereas the other venues will be valued at less and gradually stop receiving any sort of bids whatsoever. And so in this way, the campaign is automatically able to intelligently find and pay for the inventory that's going to deliver the performance needed for your campaign. And now I'm actually going to pass it back to Kevin to talk about a couple of case studies that we've done that demonstrate the strength of the optimization system.
Thanks, Nick. So hopefully Nick's examples that he reviewed have given you guys a better sense of how the algorithms actually approach the challenge of performing against some sort of financial goal for a campaign versus the wide pool of inventory that's out there. And the next thing we wanted to do was connect you with a couple of case studies, exactly like Nick said, that show you and have shown to our clients the value of combining an automated optimization algorithm with their own expertise. So YellowHammer Media Group is a great example. They're a partner of ours located here in New York, and they run several brand performance campaigns or campaigns driven by both reach goals but also performance goals. One of the challenges they faced was that a lot of inventory that's categorized across the internet is bucketed both on a publisher basis, but also, of course, more specifically on a site basis. And more traditionally, our optimization algorithm would address the publisher bucket first in an attempt to carefully filter down inventory which was performing, and later on move to site specific as we got a better sense of performance. What we've improved in the optimization algorithm is to be able to hit that site specific level earlier in the process and focus more on that earlier so that the cost of a campaign spending in learn, which is the phase in which we're still understanding what inventory is performing and isn't, decreases substantially. And we found that for some of YellowHammer's campaigns, that decreased learn costs by 40 to 50%, and it speeds up the entire life of the campaign. So this is critical not just from a budget perspective, but if you can think about those short flight campaigns that you're running that still have a performance goal, the criticality of learning quickly is just as important as learning on a cost-effective basis. So we've seen that work extremely well for YellowHammer and several other of our clients, and just wanted to relay that enhancement as an example. The next case study that we wanted to take a look at was another partner located here in New York, CPX Interactive. With them, our key enhancement that has shown a lot of return has been the imp to click consideration. So the optimization team here at AppNexus worked very closely with the team from CPX to ensure that our evolving algorithm obtained insights on their campaign's performance in a fraction of the original time. Since a click is required for any post-click conversion event, and because clicks occur more frequently than conversions, AppNexus modified its ranking algorithm to factor in click data during the earlier stages of optimization. This change increased the algorithm's effectiveness because it provided more data points for analysis. And as you can imagine, the most critical element of what an optimization algorithm is working with is data. We have to have as much data as we can as quickly as possible, but it also needs to be the right type of data so that we can filter on a meaningful basis. So a larger relevant data set increased the speed at which algorithms identify patterns when CPX's campaigns were purchasing inventory, and this edge provided additional directional information for predicting conversion probabilities. So using a different enhancement, we achieved similar goals to what we saw with YellowHammer, where we were able to speed up the time of a campaign effectively going through the learn phase and moving into later phases of optimization, effectively managing budgets so that less was needing to be spent in learn and more of a budget was being spent on inventory that we had already identified as performing. So these two case studies hopefully give you a couple of real-world examples of how we're partnering with our clients, not just to understand optimization better, but to actually take their use cases and iterate on how our algorithm works. And that leads us to kind of our last topic here, where we wanted to talk about next steps in terms of how we're looking at optimization. So some of the improvements we're making are targeted learn, where we're learning more in a more smart fashion when we're looking at managed inventory that a network is running their own campaigns against. We're also looking to expand our functionality in RTV optimization. So when you're purchasing inventory that may not necessarily be direct inventory which you're managing. So we've got lots of efforts and a team focused on expanding our capabilities there. Of course, we're also going to be presenting more sell-side enhancements to make the controls as well as the output of the algorithm more effective for publishers as we iterate on how all of our technology works. We're also going to be making sure that budget plays a continuously important role in how campaigns are optimizing. So as you can see, optimization is very much a focus at AppNexus. Our goal is to make sure that it's a focus to you as well, no matter what role you're playing in the ecosystem. We think it's critical that you have a good sense of how to interact with optimization so that you can maximize return for any activity that you're transacting on, whether it's buying an impression or selling an impression. Here at AppNexus, we certainly don't believe in the term black box. We also don't believe in the term automagically. We think it's critical that everybody has at least a framework of understanding of how these algorithms are actually working and how we're iterating on these algorithms. We invest a lot in education, both externally with our clients and our partners, as well as internally. So, for example, you're joining us today as part of Optimization Week, where we have a variety of webinars as well as on-site events and white papers that we're pushing out this week to hopefully get the industry more involved in how everybody thinks about optimization. We also invest heavily internally and train every new employee on how our optimization algorithms work so that they have a sense of not just how it works, but how and why it's so critical to our clients and our partners. So the focus of today's presentation was connecting you with some of the basics of how our algorithms work. And one question we've seen come up a couple of times in the chat here is that this was very helpful and it makes a lot of sense, but how does this ultimately affect my bottom line and how do I generate more results from this? And I think it's important to point out that today's webinar was hopefully your introduction and your first step in learning more about how optimization works and how to think about optimization and why it's such a valuable element as you take your next steps as a business. My position and AppNexus's position would be that you use this as a first step and you ensure that you're reaching out to your account manager and your implementation consultant if you're a current client, or you're reaching out to your account executive and your sales engineer if you're looking to work with AppNexus. Or if you haven't interacted with AppNexus yet, you can reach out to sales@appnexus.com and use those avenues that you have today to take the next steps in learning about optimization. If you're a current client, then I'm sure you'll recognize that as we onboard clients, AppNexus invests heavily in making sure that the right teams at your company have as much knowledge about optimization as possible. We have dedicated training modules for that content. We also can provide additional training if your team hasn't interacted with the optimization engine recently. So that's something that we absolutely encourage you to contact your team here at AppNexus about. Ultimately, whatever connection point you have with AppNexus today, we're more than happy to help you take next steps in understanding how optimization can play a more meaningful role for your company. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and thank Nick, of course, for joining me here. I wanted to thank Jenny Lynn, who's been organizing our Optimization Week here. And I also wanted to advise you guys, if you haven't interacted, if you don't have a connection point here at AppNexus today, the email alias to reach out to is sales@appnexus.com, and we'll absolutely be ready to get back to you guys. I do appreciate everybody who sent questions in. We got to address a couple of them. Hopefully you have a chance to connect with us so that we can make sure we can address all of them for you. So thanks again to everybody on the line.
Thanks again, everybody. It was nice sharing with you.
Yep. And we do have many more events scheduled this week, and you'll be hearing a lot more about optimization from AppNexus. There's a URL that you can reach out to, appnexus.com/optimization, if you want to learn more on your own. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, guys.
Have a good day.